For our fourth and final game, we are going to recreate a small version of Flappy Bird. Now this game will allow you to show you an example of how to use 2D animation and how we can use multiple sprites, string them together, and make different animation clips, call those animation clips, and transition between them and such. So the first thing we need to do is set up our scene. So in Flappy Bird, our scene consists of tubes, the background, and the bird itself. So let's go ahead and get our image and set those up. First things is you need to come over to our notebook and find the Flappy Bird section under Unit 5 and the first page, which is the scene setup. It includes the Flappy image. You need to right click and save as. You are going to save it in your project for your retro game. So mine is right here, assets, images, and I would just keep it as Flappy images, hit save. Then you can go over to Unity and let the image load. All right, with this image selected, since we have multiple images in this one, we need to change our sprite mode to multiple. Hit the apply button down here because we want to apply the changes. Now, if you don't hit that apply when you hit the sprite editor, you will get a pop-up menu that says, do you want to apply these changes? And you will just hit the apply. So this is what our sprite looks like. We're simply going to let Unity do some of the slicing for us. So we're going to go slice. And now see that we have each of these images sprites separate from each other. So I know what they are. I'm going to go ahead and change the names. So background. And then the birds, if you want, we could just keep them as, you could change them. We could say bird 1, bird 2, and bird 3. So you have 1, 2, and 3. And lastly is we're going to need to do something special kind of with our tube. So in Flappy Bird, the tubes are stretched out. And as you notice, our tube is small. If I would keep our tube like this and try to stretch the image out, it's actually going to stretch the whole entire image, the tube top including. So to fix this, we're actually going to separate it. So what we first need to do is we're going to have one for the top of the tube and one for kind of the body of the tube. So since we have a sprite already created, I can simply kind of zoom in here, grab this blue line, and move it so that it's kind of grabbing the very edge of that tube top part. With that, then we can change the name of this image to tube top. Hit enter kind of just to do a self-confirmation within Unity. And lastly, we want this whole image, so what I want you to do is click and drag out to encapsulate this part of the tube body. Now, you do not want to be up here. You want to be down a ways, per se, for the away from this outline. All we really are concerned about is this outer edge outline, and that we don't hit any edge, and then we just have this whole image inside here, because then we can simply stretch this image up and down, and actually it will keep its the way it looks. So this is the tube body, and so I'm just going to rename that, and then I have all my sprites set. I'm going to hit this apply button up here. That way I can exit out. I can hit this little triangle and see that I have the background, bird 1, 2, and 3, the tube body, and the tube top ready to assemble our scene. Now, if you don't already have it, we're going to, you need to make a new scene and go Command S to save, call it Flappy Bird. And then we can start assembling our scene. The first thing I want to do, again, is making the tube. So I'm going to grab out a tube top. Try this again, tube top. And I'm going to grab out a tube body. Now, the hard part is alignment, because I want this tube body to go underneath the tube top. Well, the easiest thing to do is to select both of them and just pick an arbitrary number like 3 or 4, not 34. and that will align them both in the x-axis. The second thing you probably want to do is to make sure that the tube body is somewhat underneath here. The top of it is underneath the tube. Now you might be asking yourself, well, now it's overlapping, it looks weird. Well, if you remember from previous games, we have used the order in layer. So just like with Pong in the netting that we created, I want to change the order in layer. Well, the tube body needs to be behind the tube top. Since the tube body in all these image sprites default to 0, I'm just going to put in -1 for the order in the layer. And now you'll see my tube body actually goes behind the tube top every time. Then I can switch to the transform tool by switching up here or hitting the T key on my keyboard and just grab the lower edge and stretch it out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and stretch it out kind of to say there. Now, these are separate, but I kind of want them together, right? They kind of move together. So what I'm going to do is just kind of position this one, hit the F key with both the tube top and body selected so that I kind of center in, and I'm going to go to game object to create empty. And what that does is it creates a game object in the middle of both of these, to which, just like we had done in Space Invaders, I can grab both of these and parent them inside the new game object. And you'll see this little triangle appear so that I can hide and show. I'm going to rename this to tube bottom. Now the reason I'm doing this to tube bottom is because not only do I need a tube bottom, but I also need a tube top. Okay, so I'm not fully done here until I duplicate this. Using the move tool, grab the y-axis and move it straight up so that they are both in line with each other. Figure out my rotation, hit the E key or the rotate tool and figure out what axis do I need to rotate this tube bottom, and notice that as I rotate that the Z axis is changing. And I know that if it was facing upward and I want to flip it basically to face the opposite direction, that's 180 degrees. Go back to the move tool, kind of position them close together like this. I'll rename this to tube top. And now select both the tube top and bottom, hit F to focus in on the center, create one more empty game object, and parent now both of these into the game object. And I can now officially name this one as my tube. You could also call it tube set, you could call it whatever you need to. And notice, here's my game screen, and here's how big my tubes are. They are pretty big. So I'm going to move the scale tool, and you can do this if you want, you don't have to, but I'm going to kind of scale it down to kind of a more reasonable tube size that looks nice on the screen comparing to the size. Lastly, to finish off these tubes, what I want to do is and I should have done this in the first place, but the tube body, the tube tops, both of these, if you hold the command key or the control key, you can click through all of these, select them all, and we need to add a physics 2D box collider to them because we want to know when these things get collided with. And that's going to be collided with the bird, which we will code later, but we want to have all our objects to have a box collider. Okay, last but not least, so you kind of get these all set up like this. Get a good spacing, good sizing. You can always change these later, but I want to make a prefab. So the reason we make a prefab is because if I ever have to make any changes to, say, this object, I can do it to one prefab instead of 20 different sets of these tubes, which is what we'll have here in a second. So if you remember, to simply make a prefab, we click on it, we drag, and we hover over a folder, in our case, the prefab folder, and now the word tube highlights to blue, and we have a prefab over here. You can then start thinking about, and I'm going to put this set of tubes over here, and I'm going to Command D duplicate and start kind of moving these tubes up and down. And you can actually move them in this mode, you know, keeping the idea that this is our camera screen, okay? But just simply doing this, just duplicating them, maybe going down a ways, making somewhat difficult. But I would say you want about 20 or so, 15 to 20 of these sets of tubes. We're not going to have the program auto-generate these tubes randomly. We're just going to worry about the animation and learning new topics here with Unity. So again, I'm about almost done here duplicating. I'm just going to go to 15. Like I said, you can go 15, you can go 20, you can go however many you want.